experts. I am Alex. Unfortunately, Marcia is not here today. And like we said, it appears that, the choice is going to be between President Barack Obama and candidate and Governor Mitt Romney. And so with this and learning this, I think we're looking, quite frankly, at Mitt Romney, not only the candidate, but also, too, the religion itself, the Mormon religions. And so because of that, I welcome now to the show an expert in the Mormon faith because, quite frankly, he's a Mormon right now, and he spent 2 years in God's Mormon Army, wrote a book by the exact same name, MormonArmy.net. I welcome Ross Palfreyman to News and Action. We're talking about the idea of whether or not faith and religion should be used to vet a potential candidate. President Kennedy, back when people were worried, the fact that he was a Catholic and that somehow the Pope would run America. Of course, our current president, Barack Obama, people still question what his faith is, and so people are taking a critical look at Mitt Romney and ultimately, for the first time, being exposed to the Mormon religion. What can you tell me about your religion and your faith from a positive point of view that you think Mitt Romney and what he has done and what he has done in the Mormon Church, how that could play positively for America?
All right. Well, let's see. The very first part of what you talked about was whether John F. Kennedy would be run by the Pope, and that was a concern for people. And I'm sure that's the same kind of concern that people would have about Mitt Romney. So let's dispel that first. Remember that one of the most powerful, most liberal people in the country right now is Harry Reid. And I doubt that he gets a call from Salt Lake and follows their advice. And if he does get a call, I'm sure he doesn't follow the advice. And yet right. he's a member in real good standing. He's a great guy. He is a solid LDS Mormon guy. And yet he couldn't be more different than Mitt Romney, at least politically. So,
and Russ, I hate to interrupt you there, but you bring up an interesting point that I hadn't even, quite frankly, realized. I think because of Mitt and even Marco Rubio and it coming up, you kind of assume that Mormons are very conservative. But, you just brought up Harry Reid. Are Mormons as a whole conservative or no?
I would say that as a whole, they are rather conservative. A very interesting thing historically. When the Mormons were driven out of the United States and they went west to Utah, and it was to avoid the ongoing persecution, they set up basically their own society, and mostly that was done through Brigham Young. Once the United States started moving west towards Utah, the Mormons wanted to become a part of the nation again. So one of the problems that the government had, and this is back in the 1890s, was, what is going to happen here? Is this going to be a voting bloc? So even before that happened, and going back another 20 years in the 1860s, 1870s, Brigham Young would show up at congregations on occasion, and he would say, okay, you on the left side, you're Democrats. You on the right side, you're Republicans. And the state of Utah has always had a two-party system since all that time back because they were simply divided by the church, and they said, okay, they want a two-party system, we give it to them. Now, I went to school in Utah, and I've got to say, Democrats in Utah are like moderate Republicans in California, where I live now. So it's not to say they're all really liberal, and I would say the church generally is quite conservative, or the church members. The church is actually pretty careful about staying out of politics. They don't get involved very often. But the membership is probably fairly conservative, but there's a healthy liberal population in the church.
Tell me about this mission. Now, let me, in full disclosure for everybody here, my very first girlfriend ever in the 7th grade was a Mormon, and I was she was a great gal, and obviously things did not work out. But I've always kind of had a fascination with the Mormon Church, just because my very first girlfriend was Mormon. So, and I always heard about these missions. And missions, I don't think, are anything exclusive, obviously, to the Mormon faith, but what is it that a mission is set up to do in the Mormon faith? Obviously, you're looking for converts, but ultimately, what does a man or a boy get out of going on a mission?
Okay. Let's see. That's several questions in one. Let me try to do the last question first, which is what is the mission giving to an individual? First of all, you volunteer to go on a mission. I would say right now we have about 55,000 missionaries out. Of those 55,000 missionaries, about 12 to 15% of them are women. So it's not just men, but it is also women. There are also a few thousand senior couples who are retired and have volunteered to go back out and work as a couple. What happens out there is the idea is to proselyte and to share the gospel, which we believe makes people's lives better with other people. It's kind of following the admonition of Jesus Christ when he says, if you want to really find your life, lose it in the service of other people. So for those 2 years, you have an opportunity to completely immerse yourself in trying to help other people in their lives. Mostly you proselyte, but we have lots of service missionaries who go out and do specific things. A couple from our congregation has been on 3 missions, one of them to help people learn how to farm in Cambodia, one of them to help drill water wells in Africa. And so there are lots of different things people do. Mostly it's proselyting, though. And the idea is once you're out there and you're losing yourself in the service of others, which is the idea, you actually find yourself. So people like me, who were basically C students before my mission, actually came back from the mission and did well in college. And it was it was a happy surprise for my parents. And the idea is you actually hone in your skills, your desires, what it makes you think about your life because you're helping other people with their lives, and you start to realize that you should take a little more conscious effort to define yourself rather than what I probably would have done is join a fraternity and waste several years, and which a lot of my friends did, and they turned out just fine. But
sure,
yeah,
of course.
But the reality was, while they were doing that, and while that was more my personality than anything else, it actually compelled me to look at other people's lives, try to help them, and what that did to me was it helped me focus on my life.
Having a fascinating conversations about really one of the biggest news stories this week. It's pretty obvious that Mitt Romney is going to be the Republican nominee. It's kind of a no-brainer. Just got to go through the entire formalities in Tampa at the GOP convention. And he is going to be taking on, obviously, President Barack Obama. And part of this, there are some questions. And I know there are some questions because I am in the state of Florida, but I also spent a lot of time in the state of Georgia, where there was a Georgia representative who said she doesn't trust Mitt because she doesn't trust that Mormon faith. And quite frankly, I think a lot of people have those questions, and that's why we've been having this dialogue during this edition of News and Experts. We're speaking with Ross Palfreyman, author of the book 2 Years in God's Mormon Army, who is a Mormon himself, who wrote a book about his time as a missionary for the Mormon faith. And quite honestly, I just think it's something that we need to learn about. Now, Romney served his 2-year mission in France, and he also served time as a bishop in a congregation in Massachusetts. How do you think that would shape Romney in particular as a person and potentially as a president, Ross?
Okay, blending them a little bit. I think that what it shows is that he is willing to take his time to help other people, not only in groups but on an individual basis. His reputation generally. By the way, I should back up and say I was a Newt Gingrich fan to begin with.
Oh, wow.
Okay,
so you were pretty disappointed this week.
Yeah, and so that people know, it isn't just a straight up, well, he's a Mormon, I'm for him. I was a Newt Gingrich guy, and then I heard a few things, and I slowly moved over to the Romney side. So it isn't just Mormons helping Mormons.
Okay. I'm glad you said that. Yeah.
So what I think has happened in the media, Romney doesn't have full control over, but he has some control, and I think he's made a conscious decision not to talk about religion at all.
Right.
He's not a spokesman for the church. He doesn't want to be a spokesman for the church. He's running for president of the United States. So what has happened is there's a whole side of him, and it's his church side, which plays a large part in his life, that doesn't get exposed at all, and it's books like mine, 2 Years in God's Mormon Army, that will help people see more about Mitt Romney. So the question you asked is how do these faith-based activities of his help shape his life, and what can we glean from that? And I think one of the biggest things is he did his mission 2.5, for him in the early 60s, I believe it was 2.5 years. So it was even longer than 2 years. He left Ann Romney, who is obviously the love of his life, and they were sweethearts before he left. And he left her at home, and he went out and decided that he was going to try to help other people. People say he was very wealthy, and he says, well, I earned my wealth, and my dad didn't leave me anything, and he contributed it to charity instead of leave it to Mitt and the other kids, which is all great. But he was the governor's son, so he has some money, and he was living probably fairly well. But when he went to France, he accepted the same budget that everybody else had, whether they were rich or poor, and that budget he paid for himself, just like everyone else. The church doesn't pay you to go. So you sacrifice, you pay your own way, and you live the same way everybody else does. So that's the first thing, is that he lived like everyone else for that 2.5 years. Then, in addition, he had to go around and teach. France is a very hard mission to go to because you don't.
They're not very open-minded.
Correct. They don't meet with a lot of success there. So
right.
he had to work and be disappointed quite often. Now, my mission was similar in that there was not a lot of success. The people in Thailand were Buddhist, but what I enjoyed about it was they were very friendly, and they had a phrase, Tuk Sasana Son Haikon Ben Kundi, which is, all religions teach you to be good. And with a great big smile, they invited you in, you had dinner, you had a great discussion, and you rarely baptized anybody. But it was more pleasant than what he would have experienced in France. I have a son-in-law who served his mission in France, and so I have had discussions with him about it. He loved his mission, but there was a lot of rejection. One thing that you do learn as a missionary is how to listen to people, because you can't just go there and strong-arm people into doing what you want them to do. You have to listen to what their needs are. You have to respond to those needs. And if you can't respond to them, they aren't going to listen. And so that's a lesson that virtually all Mormon missionaries learn, is how to listen to people and what are their real needs. And so I think that's something that Mitt Romney doesn't get credit for, that I'm sure he has learned both as a missionary and as a bishop, and then later as a stake president.
I only got about 60 seconds left, and then I have to get to my next expert. I want to cover two quick things.
Okay.
One is the word of wisdom, and that in Mormons I think is kind of interesting, and I think there's kind of something interesting for people to know about that.
With very short time, I will say that Jesus Christ taught in the New Testament that our bodies were the temples of our spirits. And so we have an obligation to take care of those bodies. And in doing so, you don't take into it things that hurt the body. And for the sake of ease, what seems to happen all the time is you ultimately get down and define taking care of your body as no alcohol, tobacco, or caffeinated drinks. But the word of wisdom is more broad than that. Don't eat meat except in the winter. Eat grains and fruits in the summer. I mean, it's a pretty broad health law that came about over 100 years ago.
And then finally, as we wrap up, and I want to get to our next expert, and I know this is going to sound like a very ignorant question, but this is a nationwide show, and we have a lot of people in the South listening, and I think it's a question that I think bears asking: are Mormons Christians?
Well, I hear that all the time, and the first question I have in return is, who gets to make that decision? Who's the one that God set up to make that call? And leaving that aside just as a rhetorical question, we do believe in Jesus Christ as our Lord and Master, as the God who came to this world as a perfect person, lived a perfect life, gave up his life for our sins, and by his grace we are resurrected and enjoy the fruits of an eternal existence. So if that means we're not Christians, well, then so be it. But we believe we are Christians.
And I kind of love the sarcasm there. I get a kick out of that. As we wrap up here, so do you think ultimately Romney's faith is going to play any sort of a factor into this election?
It will, and it should. He is made up as a Mormon. He is a Mormon, and that's why I thought my book, 2 Years in God's Mormon Army, would be a great read for people right now. It's an easy read, and it tells you all kinds of things. In fact, in the back, there's a glossary that has certain Mormonese terms, including the word of wisdom, and defines it and lays it out. And people have enjoyed reading it because it's not complicated. It's very simple, and it does tell you a lot about who Mitt Romney is and who the Mormons are.